Okay, guys, this is the new format of the SAT, basically short questions, and it mixes together everything, reading comprehension, grammar, writing syntax, vocabulary, everything that you possibly could use to communicate is being tested in these short questions. And we never really know until we read the question what they're looking for. So we might as well get started. As Mexico's first president from an indigenous community, Benito Juarez became one of the most blank figures in his country's history. Among the many significant accomplishments of his long tenure in office, Juarez consolidated the authority of the national government and advanced the rights of indigenous peoples. Indigenous peoples meaning people that have been there for a long, long time before the Spanish came. So we have a choice here. Benito Juarez became one of the most blank figures in his country's history. A, unpredictable. B, important. C, secretive. D, ordinary. Okay, so who has a choice here they want to share with me?
B.
You are correct, important. And he's very important because he was the first indigenous president and he had a very long tenure, meaning he was in office for a long, long time, and he had a lot of significant accomplishments. So when you add all that up, it makes him very important. It does not make him unpredictable, and it does not make him secretive, like he's trying to hide something. And it certainly doesn't make him ordinary. So the only right answer is B, important. Okay, question 2. Due to their often strange images, highly experimental syntax, and opaque subject matter, many of John Ashbery's poems can be quite difficult to blank and thus are the object of heated debate among scholars. So these poems are very complicated and they are apparently difficult to understand, right? So Ashbery's poems. Hey, can you please turn off your microphone, honey, whoever that is? Please turn off your mic, honey. Due to their often strange images, highly experimental syntax, meaning word formation and sentence formation, and opaque, meaning you can't see through it, subject matter, many of Ashbery's poems are difficult to blank. A, delegate. B, compose. C, interpret. And D, renounce. What do you think? C is correct, interpret. And these are hard poems. They're just difficult poems. You read them and you're not sure what he's trying to say. So it's hard to interpret them. Okay, that's the correct answer. Good job. All right, question 3. The Cambrian explosion gets its name from the sudden appearance and rapid diversification of animal remains in the fossil record about 541 million years ago during the Cambrian period. Some scientists argued that this blank change in the fossil record might be because of a shift in many organisms to body types that were more likely to be preserved. So the fact that there was such an explosion of different types of fossils, and that previous to that they couldn't find a lot of fossils, may be because the bodies of these organisms had more skeletal structure, and therefore they were more easy to preserve. And that's why we found them. That's the theory. Okay, but some scientists argue that this blank change, okay, A, catastrophic, B, elusive, C, abrupt, D, imminent. So catastrophic doesn't really fit because that would mean that it was a bad thing. But actually the explosion of life is not a bad thing on Earth. Elusive meaning we can't see where it is. No, we know where it is. It's in the Cambrian period. C, abrupt would be sudden, and that might fit. And D, imminent means it's about to happen. Well, this happened 540 million years ago. So it's not imminent, right? So what do you think is the right answer here?
C.
Yeah, it's abrupt. There was a sudden change in the fossil record. And they have a theory about why it may have been true. Or maybe it had nothing to do with the fact that the organisms had body types that were more easily preserved. Maybe it really was just an explosion of different life forms. Nobody really knows. Okay, during a 2014 archaeological dig in Spain, Vicente Lull and his team uncovered the skeleton of a woman from El Agar, an early Bronze Age society, buried with valuable objects signaling a high position of power. This finding may persuade researchers who have argued that Bronze Age societies were ruled by men to blank that women may have also held leadership roles. So they find this skeleton of a woman from the Bronze Age, and she's got all these valuable objects and treasures around her. So she was buried with great ceremony and great respect. She was a very important person. And so they're thinking that not only men could be leaders, but also women too. So let's look at the sentence. This finding may persuade researchers who have argued that Bronze Age societies were ruled by men to blank that women may have also held leadership roles. A, waive. B, concede. C, refute. D, require. So what do you think the right answer is here?
B.
B is correct. Concede. Concede meaning to allow for the possibility, to offer a partial agreement, right? To say, yeah, that could be true, to kind of go along with the theory that both men and women could be leaders. So concede, and none of the other words fit. Waive means to basically not come to an opinion or anything. You waive your decision. Refute means that you're arguing against the very thing that you're trying to concede. So refute is the opposite of the word you want. And require certainly doesn't fit. So B is the right answer. Okay, 5. According, within baleen whale species, some individuals develop an accessory spleen, a seemingly functionless formation of splenetic tissue outside the normal spleen. Given the formation's greater prevalence among whales known to make deeper dives, some researchers hypothesize that its role isn't blank. Rather, the accessory spleen may actively support diving mechanisms. Now, you guys probably don't know this, but in humans, when we exercise, we need to get muscle blood flow. So we need to shift blood flow to our muscles. So what happens is our spleen contracts and pushes out any blood that's in the spleen in order to fill our blood vessels so that the blood can be diverted to the muscles. That's why sometimes you get a pain in your left side when you run, because your spleen is contracting to push blood towards your muscles. So the spleen can have a role in diving too. But anyway, so they're saying that it isn't just sitting there, this accessory spleen, that it might actually have a function. So given the formation's greater prevalence among whales known to make deeper dives, some researchers hypothesize that its role isn't blank. Rather, it may actively help with diving. So its role isn't A, replicable, B, predetermined, C, operative, D, latent. You guys know what latent means? It means hidden, not seen. Okay. It also could mean not operational yet. So replicable doesn't make sense, that its role isn't replicable, meaning repeatable. Of course it is if the whales are diving and diving. Predetermined, well, it would be predetermined if there was a function for it. C, operative, well, they're saying that it is operative, that it may function in diving. So if you say it isn't operative, that's the opposite of what you want to say. And D, latent meaning hidden or unknown. So which word do you think fits best?
Latent.
Latent is correct. And the reason is because the alternative, rather, is that it has an active support in diving mechanisms. So rather than the purpose of this extrasplenic tissue being unknown or hidden, it actually may be related to diving. So the right answer is D, latent. According to a U.S. tax policy expert, state taxes are blank other factors when considering an interstate move. Even significant differences in state taxation have almost no effect on most people's decisions, while differences in employment opportunities, housing availability, and climate are strong influences. So they're saying that state taxes, even if they differ by a lot between different states, don't really affect people's decision about whether or not to move to that state. That the decision is really influenced much, much more by employment, housing, and climate. So let's read it again. According to a U.S. tax policy expert, state taxes are blank other factors when considering an interstate move. Are A, consistent with other factors? Doesn't make sense, right? Other factors are more important. Are representative of other factors? No. Very different, right? C, are overshadowed by other factors? Could be. And are irrelevant to other factors. Which one do you think makes most sense? Anybody?
D.
Okay, C is the right answer, because the main idea of the passage is that the other factors are much more important, which means they overshadow the tax thing. Okay, so it's that relationship. Irrelevant doesn't really bring that point through. The point of the other three being much more important. So that's why you want to use the word overshadow. I agree that irrelevant is confusing. It could potentially be, but the real relationship between these other three factors dominating people's decision versus taxation, which is very, very minor, means that they overshadow taxation. Okay? So the right answer is C. Okay, 7. The author's claim about the relationship between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens is blank, as it fails to account for several recent archaeological discoveries. To be convincing, his argument would need to address recent finds of additional hominid fossils, such as the latest Denisovan specimens and Homo longi. So the author's claim is blank because it fails to account for something. So what's that?
Sorry, my bad.
Yeah, please turn your mic off. So the author's claim is blank because it fails to account for other evidence that's come to light. So his claim is not really that strong, right? That's what the sentence is trying to say. You know, it's failing to take into account certain factors. So his claim is weaker than it should be, right? That's the implication. So what word here that we have in our choices: disorienting, tenuous, nuanced, or unoriginal, is kind of a synonym for weak?
B.
Yes, tenuous. There is a tenuous link between capital punishment and the murder rate, meaning that we're not really sure that capital punishment deters people from murdering other people. The link is kind of weak. It's not well established. So tenuous is perfect here. The author's claim about the relationship between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens is tenuous. It's weak because it fails to take into account other data, other evidence. So the right answer here is tenuous, B. Definitely correct. None of the other words mean weak. Okay. That's question 7. Question 8. The following text is from Georgia Douglas Johnson's 1922 poem, Benediction. It's about an old woman talking to her son, I think. Go forth, my son, winged by my heart's desire. Great reaches yet unknown await for your possession. I may not, if I would, retrace the way with you. My pilgrimage is through, but life is calling you. So basically, she's an old lady. She said, you know, I've done my adventures. I've done my traveling. I've gone through my life. And now it's your turn. You must spread your wings. Great reaches yet unknown. Adventure awaits you. A whole life is in front of you. So she's encouraging him to live life to the fullest and to seek adventure, opportunity, experience. And she's saying, hey, I want you to go, but I'm not going with you. Okay, which choice best states the main purpose of the text? To express hope that a child will have the same accomplishments as his parents? It doesn't say that. It says have their own adventure. B, to suggest that raising a child involves many struggles? Totally irrelevant. Doesn't even mention that. C, to warn a child that he will face many challenges throughout his life? No, it's not that negative. It's actually a very positive message. D, to encourage a child to embrace the experiences that life will offer. What do you think of D. Anybody? Yeah, D is the right answer. She's encouraging the child to embrace the experiences of life. Great reaches yet unknown await for your possession. Go out there, discover what there is out there. So the right answer is D. Okay, 9. The following text is adapted from Indian Boyhood, a 1902 memoir by Charles Eastman, a Santee Dakota writer. In the text, Ohiyesa recalls how the women in his tribe harvested maple syrup during his childhood. Now, you guys probably have never seen this, but I used to live in upstate New York, and in the springtime, they used to tap the maple trees. They literally would pound a metal tap into the tree, and then they would hang a bucket from the tap, and the maple syrup would drip into the bucket. And of course, maple syrup was, before sugarcane became an industrial crop, maple syrup was the only way to sweeten things. It wasn't just put on pancakes. It was used in making all kinds of things, all kinds of cakes, cookies, breads. And eventually it was replaced by sugar, which was easier to transport, easier to preserve, slightly sweeter, and could be turned into molasses. So, but there was a time when maple syrup was a big deal. Okay, anyway, now the women began to test the trees, moving leisurely among them, axe in hand, and striking a single quick blow to see if the sap would appear. The trees, like people, have their individual characters. Some were ready to yield up their lifeblood, while others were more reluctant. So some were dripping the sap, which turns into the maple syrup, and some were not. Now one of the birchen basins was set under each tree, and a hardwood chip driven deep into the cut which the axe had made. From the corners of this chip, at first drop by drop, then more freely, the sap trickled into the little dishes. So they're tapping the maple trees in the spring, because remember, in the spring is when the sap runs, the tree's coming back to life. So that's when you can tap it. And the sap, although it contains sugar, is nowhere near as thick as maple syrup. So what you have to do with it is you have to dehydrate it. You have to put it in big vats, and through evaporation, it gets thicker and thicker and thicker. And you can cook it too to speed up the evaporation until it gets thick enough, then you can put it on your pancakes. I once tried to do this, and it was a disaster because I tapped a few trees on my property and I collected the sap, and then I put it into a basin and I covered the basin, and I left it outside in the barn. And when I got back out there I was going to cook it, it was just covered in flies everywhere. As you know, flies love sweet things. So I had to throw the whole thing away. Anyway, all right, so where are we? Okay, so basically he writes this book and he's talking about this technique that the women used where they hit the tree to see if the sap is running. And then if it is running, then they pound a wedge into it to open it up, and they put a bucket under it so the sap will drain. But first they have to test the tree to make sure that it's running sap. So which choice best describes the function of the underlined sentence in the text? The trees, like people, have their individual characters. Some were ready to yield up their lifeblood, while others were more reluctant. So basically, you're talking about some trees ran sap, some didn't, and the women had to test it. So let's read. It portrays a range of personality traits displayed by the women. No. It has nothing to do with the women. It foregrounds the beneficial relationship between humans and maple trees. No, that's not what it does, right? It's just talking about the difference between the trees and how the women tested them. It demonstrates how human behavior can be influenced by the natural environment. Well, that's totally vague. Indeed, it elaborates on an aspect of the maple tree that the women evaluate. What do you think of that answer?
It's correct.
It is 100% correct. And the aspect is whether or not the sap is running. And how they evaluate it is they take a little axe and they chop into the tree to see if the sap runs. And if it runs, then they know they're in business. They can make maple syrup, hopefully without flies. Okay, 10. Text 1 and text 2. Ecologists have long wondered how thousands of microscopic phytoplankton species can live together near ocean surfaces, competing for the same resources. According to conventional wisdom, one species should emerge after outcompeting the rest. So why do so many species remain? Ecologists' many efforts to explain this phenomenon still haven't uncovered a satisfactory explanation. So if they're all living in the same ecological niche, one should become dominant through, random mutation, evolution, whatever, and should take over the whole area and outperform the others. But it seems like these phytoplankton, there are just unbelievable numbers of different species and they're all coexisting, which doesn't seem to make sense, according to conventional wisdom. So let's read the second part here, which may explain things. Ecologist Michael Behrenfeld and colleagues have connected phytoplankton's diversity to their microscopic size. Because these organisms are so tiny, they're spaced relatively far apart from each other in ocean water, and moreover experience that water as a relatively dense substance. This in turn makes it hard for them to move around and interact with one another. Therefore, says Behrenfeld's team, direct competition among phytoplankton probably happens much less than previously thought. So they're not really competing, they're kind of isolated from each other, even though to us they seem close together. Based on the texts, how would Behrenfeld and colleagues in text 2 most likely respond to the conventional wisdom discussed in text 1? Conventional wisdom being that competition should lead to the emergence of a dominant species. Well, let's see how we know what they would argue, but let's find it in the answers. A, by arguing that it is based on a misconception about phytoplankton species competing with one another. What do you think of that answer?
It's correct.
I think you're right. That's my guess, but let's read the others because they're not actually competing because they're kind of isolated from each other. So the competition theory kind of goes out the window, right? So like, here's a good example. If you had 10 prisoners, right? And they were all in one cell and they had to fight each other, the biggest and the strongest one would kill all the rest and survive. But if you have 10 prisoners in 10 different cells, they all survive because they can't interact. I think that's a pretty good analogy. Anyway, B, by asserting that it fails to recognize that routine replenishment of ocean nutrients. No, it doesn't say anything about nutrients being replenished. B is wrong because it's not in the text. Don't add things to the text that aren't there. C, by suggesting that their own findings help clarify how phytoplankton species are able to compete. No, they're not competing. That's the whole point because they're far apart. D, by recommending that more ecologists focus their research on how competition among phytoplankton species is increased. They don't make any recommendations for other researchers. So again, totally irrelevant. You'd be adding something to the text. So the only right answer is A. They're saying that there is no competition. It's a misconception because each type of phytoplankton is in its own little world and they're not really competing. So the A is the right answer. Okay, 11. In 2014, Amelia Kwan and her team at NASA set out to build a helicopter capable of flying on Mars. Because Mars's atmosphere is only 1% as dense as Earth's, the air of Mars would not provide enough resistance to the rotating blades of a standard helicopter for the aircraft to stay aloft. For 5 years, Kwan's team tested designs in a lab that mimicked Mars's atmospheric conditions. The craft the team ultimately designed can fly on Mars because its blades are longer and rotate faster than those of a helicopter of the same size built for Earth. So they're compensating for the fact that the air is so thin by having longer blades that spin faster. Okay, so Amelia and her team have developed a helicopter that will probably be used by humans in the Artemis project that eventually go to Mars. So this is pretty relevant. According to the text, why would a helicopter built for Earth be unable to fly on Mars? A, because Mars and Earth have different atmospheric conditions. Well, that's true. B, because the blades of helicopters built for Earth are too large. No, it's the opposite. They're larger for Mars. C, because the gravity of Mars is much weaker than the gravity of Earth. Well, that's true, but it's not the reason that is cited in the passage. D, because helicopters built for Earth are too small to handle the conditions on Mars. Doesn't say that at all. So what do you think is the right answer?
A.
Yeah, A is definitely right. And what's the difference in the atmospheric conditions? Well, Mars has 1% of the air density of Earth. By the way, how high can a helicopter fly on Earth before the air gets too thin and it can't rise anymore? Does anyone know? The Air Force has like these jet-powered helicopters that they're really powerful, but even they can't really get much above 18,000 feet. The air gets too thin and they lose their lift. That's why if you're climbing Annapurna, one of these mountains in the Himalayas, if you get stranded at 20,000 feet, there's no helicopter coming to get you. They got to send in a team on the ground. Okay, number 12. In West Africa, Jalis have traditionally been keepers of information about family histories and records of important events. They have often served as teachers and advisors too. New technologies may have changed some aspects of the role today, but Jalis continue to be valued for knowing and protecting their people's stories. So they're like historians or archivists recording history for posterity, for the people that come later. A record, cultural record. Okay, let's look and see which choice best states the main idea of the text. A, even though there have been some changes in their role, Jalis continue to preserve their community's histories. That's definitely a possibility, right? They use technology now, but their main goal is still to preserve history. B, although Jalis have many roles, many of them like teaching best. Doesn't say that in the text. Don't add things. Jalis have been entertaining the people within their communities for centuries. They're not entertainers. Doesn't say that. Technology can now do some of the things Jalis used to be responsible for. That may be true, but it's not the main idea of the passage. The main idea of the passage is they're still known for knowing and protecting their people's stories, their history, even if they have a computer now instead of a chalkboard. So the right answer here is A, even though there have been some changes in their role, Jalis continue to preserve their community's histories. A is the correct answer. 13. In 1934, physicist Eugene Wigner posited the existence of a crystal consisting entirely of electrons in a honeycomb-like structure. The so-called Wigner crystal remained largely conjecture. However, until Feng Wang and colleagues announced in 2021, many, many years later, that they had captured an image of one of these crystals. The researchers tracked electrons between two semiconductors and then cooled the apparatus, causing the electrons to settle into a crystalline structure. By inserting an ultra-thin sheet of graphene above the crystal, the researchers obtained an impression, the first visual confirmation of the Wigner crystal. So in 1934, the physicist posited, meaning speculated, or put forth the theory that electrons could form a crystalline structure. But nobody could find it until what? How many years later? 90 years later? 80 years, 80, 90s. Anyway, many years later, in 2021, they finally were able to get an image of this electron crystal and kind of prove the theory that Wigner came up with. So let's see, which choice best states the main idea of this text? A, researchers have obtained the most definitive evidence to date of the existence of the Wigner crystal. Yeah, the most definite evidence is an actual image of the electron structure. So A is a good answer. B, researchers have identified an innovative new method for working with unusual crystalline structures. Well, it doesn't say that in the passage. It doesn't say that it's a new method, maybe a method they used before. C, graphene is the most important of the components required to capture an image of a Wigner crystal. It doesn't say that. It says they used graphene. It doesn't say it's the most important thing. D, it's difficult to acquire an image of a Wigner crystal because of the crystal's honeycomb structure. It doesn't say that. It doesn't say that. So you can't add information to a passage. You have to look at, the only thing that it really does say is A, researchers obtained the most definitive evidence, an actual image, an impression of the existence of the Wigner crystal. So A is the right answer. Wigner was a pretty smart guy, huh? Way ahead of his time. Okay, this is a chart interpretation. We love these. Okay, average number of individuals reporting directly to the CEOs. And we have managers and department leaders. So the managers in the 3 different time periods gradually increase from like, looks like 2 to 3 over a, what is that? 20-year period roughly. 2 to 3, okay? But look at the department leaders, how much they increase reporting. They start at about 3 and they go all the way up to 7. So there's a big jump, right, in department leaders reporting to the CEO. So there's a difference there, right, in the rate of increase. Considering a large sample of companies, economics expert Maria Guadalupe, Julie Wolf, and Raghuram Rajan assessed the number of managers and leaders from different departments who reported directly to a chief executive officer, CEO. According to the researchers, the findings suggest that across the years analyzed, there was a growing interest among CEOs in connecting with more departments in their companies. And clearly we can see that, right? Looking at the dark lines here, it's clearly a growing interest. Which choice best describes data from the graphs that support the researcher's conclusion? Okay, so we're looking at these bars, right? The average number of managers and department leaders reporting directly to their CEO didn't fluctuate from 1991 to 1995 period, from the 2001 to the 2008 period. Well, we know it did fluctuate, right? Obviously it's different, so that's wrong. B, the average number of managers reporting directly to their CEO was highest in the 1996 to 2001 period. No, it was higher over here, so that's wrong. C, the average number of department leaders reporting directly to their CEO was greater than the average number of managers reporting directly to their CEO in each of the 3 periods. While that's true, it doesn't prove the author's findings suggesting a growing interest in connecting with departments. Because this statement could be true even if all of these dark bars were flat. Even if they're all sat at, say, 3.5 and never changed, right? It would be true. The average number of department leaders is greater than the average number of managers who report, but it doesn't show a growing interest, right? So this is one of these things that's true, but irrelevant. D, the average number of department leaders reporting directly to their CEO rose over the 3-period study. Yes, boom, boom. This is the only one that supports the analysis of the researchers about a growing interest. So D is the right answer. Be careful about C, because you'll read that and you'll go, oh, it's true. Yeah, it's true, but irrelevant. Okay, moving on to 15. When digging for clams, their primary food, sea otters damage the roots of eelgrass plants growing on the seafloor. Near Vancouver Island in Canada, the otter population is large and well established, yet the eelgrass meadows are healthier than those found elsewhere off Canada's coast. To explain this, conservation scientist Aaron Foster and colleagues compared the Vancouver Island meadows to meadows where otters are absent or were reintroduced only recently. Finding that the Vancouver Island meadows have a more diverse gene pool than the others do, Foster hypothesized that damage to eelgrass roots increases the plant's rate of sexual reproduction. This in turn boosts genetic diversity, which benefits the meadow's health overall. So when you test the grass, the eelgrass, and you constantly challenge it, it's going to evolve and become more robust and more resilient and healthier, right? And the otters are constantly challenging the eelgrass. So that's the theory of why the otters can coexist with healthy eelgrass, even though when they dive down for their clams, they damage some of the eelgrass. Okay, which finding, if true, would most directly undermine Foster's hypothesis? So her hypothesis is about genetic diversity, right? At some sites in the study, eelgrass meadows are found near otter populations that are small and have only recently been reintroduced. Okay, well, that's true, but it doesn't say how healthy the eelgrass is, right? So her theory is that it's healthier because of genetic diversity induced by otter activity. So we're not really sure that that answer is the right answer because it's not really inclusive of the theory. B, at several sites not included in the study, there are large, well-established sea otter populations, but no eelgrass meadows. What do you think about that? You think the large population in the absence of eelgrass meadows, does that prove that the otters are destroying the eelgrass? No, maybe they took up residence where there was no eelgrass. So again, this is a logic question. C, at several sites not included in the study, eelgrass meadows' health correlates negatively with the length of residence and size of the otter population. That's the right answer. Correlates negatively, meaning if there are more otters and they've been there longer, the eelgrass is less healthy, which is the exact opposite of her theory. Her theory is that a healthy otter population causes healthy eelgrass. But C is it's evidence in direct contrast to her theory. Now, it's possible that she just left those sites out of her research paper because she didn't want to have to explain them and they screwed up her theory. And a lot of scientists will do that. They will select their evidence to support their theory. If they find stuff that they don't like, that's inconvenient because it tends to disprove their theory, they just kind of leave it out. This is called dishonest science, bad science. Now, I'm not saying that this woman is guilty of that, but the whole point is which finding would directly undermine or refute Foster's hypothesis. Many otters, healthy eelgrass. Well, the answer is C. It shows that the more otters there are, the less healthy the eelgrass is. So it's the opposite of her theory. So C is the right answer. And this is really kind of a logic question. Okay, 16. Scholars have noted that F. Scott Fitzgerald's writings were likely influenced in part by his marriage to Zelda Fitzgerald. But many don't recognize Zelda as a writer in her own right. Indeed, Zelda authored several works herself, such as the novel Save Me the Waltz and numerous short stories. Thus, those who primarily view Zelda as an inspiration for F. Scott's writings blank. Which choice most logically completes the text? Well, the concept here is that it's not true that Zelda was only an influence. She also was a writer in her own right. Right? So she was more important than just being an influence on F. Scott. Okay, so let's see. Zelda, as an inspiration for Scott's writings, overlooked the many other factors that motivated F. Scott. No, we're talking about Zelda. Risk misrepresenting the full range of Zelda's contributions to literature. Yes, the full range. Maybe she was an inspiration, but she also wrote short stories and she also wrote novels. So there's a range of contributions. So B looks good. C, may draw inaccurate conclusions about how F. Scott and Zelda viewed each other's works. It doesn't mention anything about what they thought of each other's work. Totally irrelevant. D, tend to read the works of F. Scott and Zelda in an overly autobiographical light. Again, completely irrelevant. By the way, can you tell me the most famous book that F. Scott Fitzgerald wrote? Anybody? Come on, guys, you've read this book already. Every ninth grader reads this book. Is anybody in ninth grade yet? Probably not. It's The Great Gatsby, F. Scott Fitzgerald. And I'll tell you, you know where they're buried? They're buried at St. Mary's Church in Maryland. I've been there. Now, what happened was Zelda went crazy and she was put in a psychiatric hospital down in, I think, Virginia or Carolina. And she died there and she was buried there. And then F. Scott, he got a heart attack in his 40s and he was buried somewhere in Virginia. Well, somebody said, well, the two of them should be buried together. So they got this little plot in St. Mary's Church down in, I believe it's Rockville, Maryland. A beautiful little old church. And they took both bodies, they exhumed them, and they buried them side by side in the churchyard. And you can go there and visit the grave of F. Scott Fitzgerald and his wife Zelda. And if you go there any day, you'll find flowers on the grave because people loved his writing. Okay, 17. Among social animals that care for their young, such as chickens, macaque monkeys, and humans, newborns appear to show an innate attraction to faces and face-like stimuli. Elisabetta Versace and her colleagues used an image of 3 black dots arranged in the shape of eyes and a nose or mouth to test whether this trait also occurred in testudo tortoises, which live alone and do not engage in parental care. They lay their eggs and they go away. They found that tortoise hatchlings showed a significant preference for the image, the facial image, suggesting that you don't have to have direct maternal care to be attracted to this facial image, because these turtles are hatched from an egg. They never even meet their mother. So let's see what it says. Suggesting that face-like stimuli are likely perceived as harmless by newborns of social species that practice parental care. No, that's not the point. The point is that the tortoises look at this face too. Researchers should not assume that an innate attraction to face-like stimuli is necessarily an adaptation related to social interaction or parental care. Yeah, B is right, because the tortoises don't have any social interaction with their mother. They don't have any parental care, and yet they're still attracted to the face. So we shouldn't assume that you need to have parental care as an adaptation, an evolutionary adaptation, to be attracted to that face-like image. So B is the right answer. 18. Compiled in the late 1500s, largely through the efforts of indigenous scribes, Cantares Mexicanos is the most important collection of poetry in classical Nahuatl, the principal language of Aztec Empire. The poems portray Aztec society before the occupation of the empire by the army of Spain. That would be Cortez. And marginal notes in Cantares Mexicanos indicate that much of the collection's content predates the initial invasion of the Spanish. Nonetheless, some of the poems contain inarguable references to beliefs and customs common in Spain during this era. Thus, some scholars have concluded that, well, if some of these poems are talking about Spanish-type customs, probably some of them were written after the Spanish invaded, not just before, right? So let's see, which choice most logically completes the text? Scholars have concluded that while its content largely predates the invasion, Cantares Mexicanos also contains additions made after the invasion. Yeah, that makes sense. B, although those who compiled Cantares Mexicanos were fluent in Nahuatl, they had limited knowledge of the Spanish language. Doesn't say anything about that. C, before the invasion by Spain, the poets of the Aztec Empire borrowed from the literary traditions of other societies. That's a wild assumption, and it doesn't say that at all. The references to beliefs and customs in Spain should be attributed to a coincidental resemblance between the societies of Spain and the Aztec Empire. Well, that's an absurd statement, okay? Because the text would have mentioned that. Obviously, Spanish European culture was very different from Aztec culture. And that's why they noticed that some of the beliefs and customs that they were writing about were actually Spanish and not Aztec. So D is kind of an absurdity. So what's the only right answer? Anybody? Abby? William? It's A. While its content largely predates the invasion, Cantares Mexicanos also contains additions made after the invasion. That's why there are references to Spanish culture. Okay, 19. In a study of the cognitive abilities of white-faced Capuchin monkeys, researchers neglected to control for the physical difficulty of the tasks they used to evaluate the monkeys. The cognitive abilities of monkeys, given problems requiring little dexterity, such as sliding a panel to retrieve food, were judged by the same criteria as were those of monkeys given physically demanding problems, such as unscrewing a bottle and inserting a straw. The results of the study, therefore, so if I took 10 people and I gave 5 of them a super easy crossword and 5 of them a really hard crossword, and I said, well, how many of them got it correct? And I concluded that the 5 that got the easy crossword were better learners and smarter. That would be an erroneous study, right? Because the tasks are so different in difficulty level. So which choice logically completes the text? The results of the study, therefore, could suggest that there are differences in cognitive ability among the monkeys, even though such differences may not actually exist. Yeah. I mean, the people with the hard crossword puzzle look dumber. So the study might conclude that there are differences, and the differences are really just based on the different difficulties of the tasks that were assigned. So A is a good answer. B, are useful for identifying tasks that the monkeys lack the cognitive capacity to perform, but not for identifying tasks that the monkeys can perform. Well, that's just not true. Empirically, you would know. C, should not be taken as indicative of the cognitive abilities of any monkey species other than this species. No, if you design the study right, you can look at cognitive abilities of any species, including humans. D, reveal more about the monkey's cognitive abilities when solving artificial problems than when solving problems encountered in the wild. Well, this one, the study is not designed for this purpose. It doesn't look at the comparison between problems in the wild and problems that are artificial. So the right answer is A, that you could have an erroneous conclusion that the monkeys have different cognitive abilities when in fact they don't, because the tasks that were given to them are very different in difficulty. Okay, so we're going to stop right here, and I'm just going to run over the vocabulary real quick because we don't have too much time left. We want to get through our vocabulary words. Okay, let us begin. Our first word is indigenous, a word that we've seen a couple times, right, in the text. So what does indigenous mean?
Native.
Yes, correct. It means native. It means a people that was there from the earliest times. Something that was there. Now, you could refer to indigenous plants, meaning plants that grow in that area, or indigenous peoples, just meaning people that were there for a long, long time before anybody else got there. So you could use that term for plants or for people. Okay, refute. What is it to refute?
To prove something is wrong.
Yeah, to disprove something. Basically, I refute your claim that trains in Japan derail every day. Okay, so I'm basically disproving it and saying that it's false. To concede, what does it mean to concede?
Admit.
Yeah, to admit that something is true. I concede that if you eat too much popcorn, your blood pressure will go up. I concede that. But you can also concede in like a sporting match. Like you concede if in chess, let's say you know you're going to lose, so you concede the game, right? So you kind of admit defeat, or you surrender something. Like he conceded the wagon trains because he knew he couldn't defend them. So concede is one of those words that can be used in different contexts. Okay, latent. What does it mean to be latent?
Hidden.
Yeah, hidden, dormant, not manifest, not obvious. It's there, but you don't know it's there. It's latent. And it can also mean something that's going to happen, like a latent disease. Like somebody that has latent Parkinson's. Maybe they don't shake yet, but they're going to shake. So it's latent. Okay, posit, to posit something. That's a verb.
You said it firmly.
Yeah, to put forward something is true. To postulate, to conjecture, to speculate. To say, I posit, I put forward this theory. I posit that sperm whales are the deepest divers of any fish or of any whale. So that's a posit. Conjecture, to conjecture. What does it mean to conjecture?
It's to give a conclusion.
Yeah, but it's a guess. It's a conclusion that's based on incomplete information. So conjecture is not as good as a conclusion that is based on evidence. Okay? You can be a scientist and you can conjecture something, meaning you haven't really got the evidence to prove it, but it's kind of a guess. Okay, alacrity, to move with alacrity. What does that mean?
Eagerness?
Yeah, it's not just fast. Like you wouldn't say, oh, that car is moving with alacrity, because it's more about attitude. You're eager, you're like enthusiastic, you're willing, you're ready, you're doing stuff. But it's not just about speed, it's about an attitude. So when you move with alacrity, it means you're all in. You're excited and you're happy to be doing it. Amenable.
Easily persuaded?
Yeah, open and responsive to suggestion, receptive to suggestion. I am amenable to editing the novel that I wrote. Yeah, I'm willing to look at editing it. I'm amenable to it. You don't want to be too amenable. If you're too amenable, then you don't have any ideas of your own, right? Okay, anachronistic. There's a big word, anachronistic. What does that mean?
Out of date?
Yeah, conspicuously old-fashioned. Doesn't fit into the current times. It's from a very earlier time. Something anachronistic would be like somebody dressing in a tuxedo every night for dinner. They used to do that, but nobody does that anymore. So that would be anachronistic. And anathema. What is anathema?
Hate?
Yeah, something or someone that you find hateful, odious, abhorrent. The other thing is anathema is a formal curse or an excommunication by the Pope. The Pope issued an anathema on the priest because he was promoting, I don't know, the killing of babies. So an anathema in the religious sense is a curse that's issued by the Pope or an excommunication. But in general use, it just means, you could say something like, my boss was anathema to me because he was always riding me for the wrong reasons. So, you just hated your boss. He was anathema. It's real pain. Okay, good. So the two words we're going to look at in terms of etymology, which I think are good words, indigenous. Now, indigenous comes from the Latin indu, I-N-D-U, which means within, okay? And gen is from the Latin root gignere, which means to beget, to give birth, to produce. So indigenous, produced from within, native to that area. Indigenous. Makes perfect sense, right? So let's look at this word gignere from the Latin, which has mutated over time into gen, G-E-N. Now we can look at a word like generate. Generate has that same root, gignere. Or a word like eugenics, right? Eugenics, making good production of basically of genes. Even the word gene comes from that root, gignere. Interesting, right? Or congenital, with birth. With birth, con is with, and gen is to give birth, right? Gignere. So something that is congenital, like a congenital malformation, you're born with 6 fingers. It means it came with your generation, it came with your birth, congenital. So these are words that use the same root as the word indigenous. And it comes from the Latin gignere, which means to beget, to give birth, to produce. Okay, good. The second word we're going to look at is this one. This is a Greek word, anachronistic. Okay, let's break it down because there's 3 sections to this word. There's a prefix, ana, a root, chron, and a suffix, istic. And all 3 of them will be explained. So ana in ancient Greek means against. Ana means against. Chron is from the Greek word chronos, which means time. Okay, so far we have against time, meaning out of time, right? Now let's look at the suffix. Istic is a suffix that comes from Greek, istikos, which takes anything and makes it an adjective. So when you're describing something, you put this istikos or istic on it. Against time, describing a person or a behavior or an object When you have that istic on, it makes it an adjective. So you can say his formal dress at dinner was anachronistic. You're using an adjective to describe his formal dress. Or her habit of wearing, I don't know, long pants to the beach was anachronistic. Nobody does that anymore. They used to. Okay, so let's look at these three parts again. The prefix, the root, and the suffix. Ana in Greek means against. Chron is from the Greek chronos, which means time. And istikos in Greek turns the word into an adjective to describe something or someone. Anachronistic. Now let's look at the word chron, time. Can anyone think of a word that uses this Greek root?
Chronic.
Chronic, right. Chronic meaning over time. Chronometer, what's a chronometer? It's a watch. Chronometer measures time, right? Synchrony, sync is same, sin is same, and chrony is time. Synchronous, meaning at the same time. So there are many, many words that use this root, okay? So basically we did one Latin word, indigenous, and we did one Greek word. And if you look at the English language, although the commonplace words are based on German and some Nordic languages, a lot of the more technical terms, a lot of the longer terms with multiple syllables come from Latin and Greek. Okay, or indirectly through French, or Spanish or Old English. So the English language is just a mixture of so many things. But don't ever forget how important Latin and Greek are in the English language. Okay, we're all set, guys. Any questions for me? Good, good. So we didn't get to finish all the questions, but I think Mindy will send you, I guess, the answers to the others. We'll probably start with something new next week. Okay? All right, guys.
Yeah, we just
What's
all
that?
right. Bye.
Okay, thank you, guys. Bye.
Yeah, I said that. Yeah. Okay.